And welcome into The Pulse, where we focus on all things people, power, and politics. And with the election less than 3 weeks out now, Michigan officials are talking about what's being done to keep elections secure in our state. And we're unveiling some new tools for the public to use. Plus, the presidential candidates giving interviews in different spaces like celebrity podcasts. We're talking with a social media and pop culture expert about how effective that actually is. But we begin with Vice President Harris sitting down on a channel you might not have expected her to, Fox News. She was interviewed by special report anchor Bret Baier, facing tough questions about issues like the border and an ad you're probably seen by the Trump campaign, claiming she supports using taxpayer dollars to allow prisoners to have gender reassignment surgery. But there was one particular point that stood out when she was asked about President Biden's mental state. Concerns about if he was able to handle the job led to the push to have him step out of the race. You know that. Here's the exchange between Harris and Bret Baier.
You told many interviewers that Joe Biden was on his game, that ran around circles on his staff. When did you first notice that President Biden's mental faculties appeared diminished?
Joe Biden, I have watched from the Oval Office to the Situation Room, and he has the judgment and the experience to do exactly what he has done in making very important decisions on behalf of the American people.
There were no concerns raised?
Brett, Joe Biden is not on the ballot.
I understand.
And Donald Trump
but
is.
You talked about it.
And Donald Trump
After George Clooney said within a few minutes of talking to President Biden at a fundraiser that he thought this was not the same Joe Biden that we saw on the debate stage.
Donald Trump is on the ballot.
I understand. You met with him at least once a week for 3.5 years. You didn't have any concerns?
I think the American people have a concern about Donald Trump, which is why the people who know him best, including leaders of our national security community, have all spoken out. Even people who worked for him in the Oval Office, worked with him in the Situation Room, and have said he is unfit and dangerous and should never be president of the United States again.
Well, you've seen the vice president do a flurry of interviews recently, both traditional and non-traditional. That's something she's been criticized for not doing enough of, having these tough one-on-ones. We'll have to see what this latest one does in terms of the polls and the race as well. And Harris's appearance on Fox News comes a day after Donald Trump took part in a Fox News town hall in Georgia, where he took questions from an audience of only women, with topics ranging from immigration and the economy to abortion and all of reproductive rights. Take a listen.
I want to talk about IVF. I'm the father of IVF, so I want to hear this question.
Yeah. Hi, President Trump.
Hi.
Welcome back to Georgia. We are so happy that you're here. We're all very blessed to be here with you, and thank you for taking our questions. So I'm the mother of 3 small children, and I have many friends that have struggled with fertility issues over the years while trying to grow their families. And while they're pro-life, they're very concerned that the abortion bans will affect their ability to access IVF and other fertility treatments. So although abortion does lie with the states, what is your stance on that, and what would you say to those women?
So I got a call from Katie Britt, a young, just a fantastically attractive person from Alabama. She's a senator. And she called me up like emergency, because an Alabama judge had ruled that the IVF clinics were illegal and they have to be closed down. A judge ruled. And she said, friends of mine came up to me and they were so angry. I didn't even know they were going, it's fertilization. I didn't know they were even involved in it. Nobody talks about it. They don't talk about it. But now that they can't do it, she said, I was attacked. In a certain way, I was attacked. And I said, explain IVF very quickly. And within about 2 minutes, I understood it. I said, no, we're totally in favor of IVF.
A recent poll shows Harris with a double-digit lead with women and Trump with a significant lead with men. And research shows that abortion has now passed inflation as the top issue for women under 30 in this election. In the meantime, Trump is continuing his visits to Michigan ahead of the election, with a stop in Detroit scheduled for Friday. After all those comments about Detroit, it'll be an interesting one to watch. So with the candidates making the interview rounds, especially on different platforms like podcasts, we wanted to know what you think about their effectiveness. Here's what people around Metro Detroit told us.
Not at all. It's completely irrelevant.
With today's youth is very important.
It's pretty important because I like to see their genuine stance on policies and things that benefit the people as a whole.
It's not that important to me. It's unfortunate that it seems to be important to a lot of people because our current president, who's a great president, I believe, just isn't presentable to the public, to the media.
What's the scale?
I mean, it could be
relatively important. I just watched a couple and thought they were very good and thoughtful and informative.
They are celebrities, aren't they?
Some of them, yeah.
Yeah, you got to put them on there so you can grill them, answer, ask them questions and stuff.
But do you think it's different on a celebrities podcast?
Anything goes nowadays, man. Let's have fun with it,
At this point, I'm just worn out about the whole campaign. All the commercials. Listen, I'm 10 months from 80. I'm too old. this is crazy.
She said she's worn out. So many people who, she's 80, she says. So many people who are half her age say they're worn out too. But, it's an important question. We actually asked the question on our website, fox2detroit.com, to see what people thought. Most of those who responded say candidates appearing on these celebrity podcasts, it doesn't really affect who they're voting for. 78%. Not a scientific poll, but an interesting conversation that if you'd like to join, you can use that QR code at the bottom of your screen. Just take your phone and go right up to it, and boom, there it is. And it'll pop up on your phone. And by the way, if you see me out and about with my cell phone and you want to talk to us about anything on your mind when it comes to politics, stop and say hi. Love to be able to talk to you. Well, one of the biggest contests here at home is the Michigan Senate race. Democrat Alyssa Slotkin and Republican Mike Rogers, obviously both going head-to-head. They're vying to fill that seat vacated by longtime Senator Debbie Stabenow. They had 2 debates now, and while Senate races can often mirror results of presidential races, and polling-wise, it seems that way right now, Senator Gary Peters says there are some differences here. He talked to The Pulse tonight.
What we see here in Michigan, as we do around the country, Senate races and presidential races tend to be very closely linked, but they're not totally linked. They are separate. And the reason for that is that they are indeed separate races. And so if you look at the Senate race, it's a candidate versus candidate race. People are going to look at Alyssa Slotkin and her Republican opponent and make a decision based on that difference. Certainly, Alyssa Slotkin is someone who's represented her district here in Michigan with distinction and honor. And has worked very hard, and she's running against a Republican opponent who has been living in Florida for many years and just decided to come to Michigan to run for office. And I think people will support Alyssa, understand that she cares deeply about Michigan, and I'm confident she will win on her own, regardless of what happens at the presidential level.
We should mention we talked to Mr. Rogers' camp about that allegation that he's just not living in Michigan, and they pointed out to me that he does have a house in White Lake right now. He's living with his brother as some issues with the infrastructure of the house are being fixed up, but that is the address that he says he is running from out here in Oakland County. A recent poll from AARP has Slotkin with a 3-point lead over Rogers and shows she's favored by women while men prefer Rogers. Kind of like the Trump thing we told you about and the Harris thing. Both candidates are continuing to visit communities and meet voters. This week, Slotkin was in Macomb County and Rogers visited Howell. So do you trust this election will actually be secure? Any of you who answered no as you're sitting on your sofa, this next one is aimed at you. Today, it wasn't a candidate at a town hall in Michigan, but the issue of election security that took center stage. State election officials led the meeting, telling the audience at the Sterling Heights Community Center that there are several measures in place to protect elections, including an upgraded file system and voting technology that's improved. Another tool, better communication between local, state, and federal government workers. Officials say while voting fraud is rare, there are precautions to make sure it's curbed.
I sort of liken election fraud to the crime of bank robbery. And why do I do that? Because I'm not going to tell you that nobody ever tries to rob a bank. I'm just going to say it's very difficult to do, and you almost certainly are going to get caught.
Now, recent polls show 77% of voters in Michigan have confidence in the elections. And by the way, today's discussion was moderated by none other than our own Charlie Langton, and I'm sure it was a very lively discussion, as he always has such a talent at doing that. Another tool unveiled today is this, the Michigan Voting Dashboard. It's a database with ballot returns and voter registration numbers across the state, and as you can see over here, it kind of gives you an exact count there. Benson says the dashboard will be updated every day with the data coming in from local clerks, who are the first officials, by the way, to receive ballots from voters.
It is trusted, reliable, and accurate. With this information, anyone can see how their own community has voted and how it is voting in real time.
We've all seen the ways that data taken out of context can be used to distort the truth. That will escalate in the weeks ahead.
Now, the dashboard can also track information on absentee ballots. According to the state, more than 2.1 million registered voters in Michigan have requested an absentee ballot, and so far, more than 670,000 of those have been completed and sent back in. It's a slightly lower return rate than in 2020. Believe it or not. For more information on how you can track your absentee ballot, head to our website, fox2detroit.com. And by the way, this is really important. I want you to hear me out here. If you have any questions about this election process and you want me to ask officials, ask away. Email me directly at roop.raj@fox.com. This show isn't just about your opinions when you do the pulse check, but your concerns and your questions. And if you have any of those, we'd like to just basically take those questions and concerns, turn around, get the answers, and come back on the Pulse on another night and answer your questions on TV. Well, the Pulse is just getting started. It isn't all about policy, but yeah, it's about personality too. Donald Trump is doing this one better in the world of entertainment than Kamala Harris to get your vote. What is he doing better? A social media and pop culture expert on how the presidential candidates have to do a lot more than show up on TV and talk policy. You're watching the Pulse on Fox 2. Welcome back to the Pulse. The election is now 20 days away or so. Both candidates hitting the pavement hard, working to spread their messages. That includes using some different kinds of formats like podcasts. Joining us now on the Pulse, social media expert Ethan Lloyd. It's good to see you, Ethan. Thanks for joining us here today.
Thank you for having me.
You know, we always depend on you to talk about what these candidates are doing to lure voters in. Kamala Harris, Donald Trump, both doing that. And you'll see right here some examples of that. This is, again, the podcast aspect of it. What do we see Ms. Harris doing right here?
Yes, and to make a clear distinction, YouTube is still social media. People confuse that it's not because it's not so direct, but there is a comment section. There's a way to share. You can communicate on that platform. So the podcasts that you see on YouTube, those are social media clips. So we're seeing something very different that we've never seen before on social media, which is presidential candidates making it their job to go on podcasts. Because this is a great way to show your personality and policy at the same time in a long format form instead of a short format form. So what we just saw on the screen were different appearances that Kamala Harris has done, and she has done a great job of showing her personality. She has gone on shows with NBA athletes. She's gone on shows with comedians. She's even been on the Shade Room, which you wouldn't necessarily expect from a presidential candidate, but we are in a very different time now. We're in a different political landscape, and we're in a different social media landscape.
You can't just depend on doing print and broadcast and call it a day. You have to be on social, and you got to find those influencers to do it, and that's what we see Harris doing. We see Trump doing much of the same. What do we see him doing here?
Yeah, no, this is very interesting. We just saw him on the podcast with Dave Ramsey. Now he's on one with Dr. Phil. He was even on Flagrant with Andrew Schultz. This is really interesting. He is going on podcasts talking about policy. You know, it's very strategic. He aligns his messaging with the audience that he's talking to. So Dave Ramsey is big on personal finance and talking about the economy. He went on there and talked about his economic plan. That is a very strong social media strategy to, in a long format way, talk about what it is that you're going to get done to the people that want to hear it. And what's really cool about all these different podcasts that we're seeing here is that they're, you know, independent. You know, these aren't right-leaning or left-leaning. They're in the middle. And that is good because that allows you to reach independent voters.
Well, that's important. And you've been very unbiased when you've been talking about both these candidates. You've talked about the good things that former President Trump has done. You've said this repeatedly, that he does policy points on social media.
Yeah.
That's going to benefit him. How?
I think it's going to benefit him because there's no question of what he's going to do if I vote for him. At least I have an understanding of what it means to check off his name in the ballot, you know, and that's helpful. I think we're seeing a new form of social media where people are using it as a tool of research. Now, whether that's the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do, we can debate all day, but that's what's happening, and he is leveraging that and showing his policy on these platforms.
And some of the other things that you've observed, you say, you know, they're both doing these podcasts. I think a lot of times people accuse the Harris camp of doing soft interviews, and they talk about that all the time. But if to be fair to both camps here, Trump is doing a lot of soft interviews too. And if you're doing a podcast or a lifestyle show or a sports show, you're probably not getting a 60-minute style question coming your way.
Yeah, and it's not always a hardball being thrown at you. You know, we talked about that these podcasts are run by comedians, NBA players, things like that, entertainers. We want it to be entertaining. You know, we want to see them cook, you know, in the kitchen when it's hot, but we also want to see how they are when they're pleasant. We want to know, you know, what kind of father or mother they are. We want to know what kind of parent they are, what kind of person they are, what kind of citizen they are. We have to look at all aspects of a candidate, not just when they're under pressure, but when they're, you know, relaxed. That's very important.
And so when you get to know somebody, not just for their policies, even though Trump is using so much of this for his policies, Kamala Harris can actually say, hey, this is who I am, get to know me as a human being, maybe something that makes you laugh, something about your family. Do you think, in your mind, does that help drive up engagement even more when people see those kinds of moments?
Yeah, any emotion that you invoke in social media content is going to make people react. And the way that people react is they press a button. They either press the comment button, the share button, the like button, whatever that button is, the algorithm likes it.
And you're looking at some other things over here. Talk about what we're seeing here in terms of the credits.
So this is what they both need to work on. I think this is very low. This is a platform called Podchaser, and it's telling us how many appearances they have had. Harris has had 37 podcast appearances, and Trump has had 43 podcast appearances. That sounds like a lot, but honestly, for a presidential candidate in this kind of political climate, I think they need to do more.
How many podcasts are out there, would you say?
In general?
A lot, right?
Well, you have...
I mean, in terms of the popular ones, the big ones that these two would want to come on.
Oh, there are thousands. There are thousands because everybody and their mother has a podcast. If I'm being honest with you, all you need is a microphone, a couple lights, and a camera, and you got yourself a podcast.
And talk about the kinds of numbers you're looking at. You know, you mentioned Kamala Harris doing 30-some, Donald Trump doing 40-some. When you add these all up, how many millions of people are you talking about?
Oh, my goodness. These are getting 2 to 3 million views a pop, and we're talking about something that is an hour long to 2 hours long. That is a lot. You just had an hour-long conversation with 2 million people, and if you know you've done 43 of them, do that multiplication. I can't do it in my head.
Well, no, I'm a journalism major myself. That's not my strong point. But this is an interesting conversation, one that will continue. Is there anything, we'll finalize this interview with the two things that you always do at the end of your interviews, which is what can Kamala Harris do better? What can Donald Trump do better outside of just showing up in general in terms of the messaging that they're going?
Oh, yes. I would like to see both of these candidates not just talking to independent podcasts, but also see them under fire a little bit. I want to see Kamala Harris go on the Candace Owens podcast. I want to see Donald Trump go on the Stephen A. Smith podcast. I want to see them in a situation where for an hour they are under fire and they are hearing what the opposition thinks. This is where you meet people in the middle. This is where you find out how people do under pressure, and that's something that you want to find out in a political leader.
Ethan Lloyd, it's good to see you. Thanks for joining us. You know, this is not a podcast, but this is a show that many of you watch and has gained a lot of steam, so we invite both. And we, by the way, I mean that. We literally email the Trump and Harris camp every single week. We're asking them to come on the show, talk to us so that they can talk to you. We thank you for talking to us today.
Thank you for having me.
Good stuff, Ethan. Well, we're giving a little history lesson about the presidential race in Michigan next on The Pulse. Know which 2 Metro Detroit counties are actually purple. You've got 3 minutes to make your guess. We'll see you after the break. Hey, we are so glad so many of you make this a part of your routine here. Welcome back to The Pulse, looking at all things people, power, and politics from the D to D.C. And now we're going to focus right now on all of us, the people of Metro Detroit, specifically how we've voted over the years. It's no secret, no 2 counties in our area are alike. This is such a critical swing state. And we have a really cool visual representation of that. Take a look. This is where each county leans since the 2000 presidential election. You probably won't be surprised to know that Wayne, Washtenaw, and Oakland overwhelmingly voted Democrat since that race. while Livingston, Lapeer, and Lenawee in St. Clair counties have voted Republican. Red. We've noticed that. But then there are two counties which might just surprise you. Macomb and Monroe. Since the 2000 election, they've been so split, they're actually considered purple counties. In fact, it's actually a 50-50 split in those counties, going Democrat and Republican since the vote. And what's even more interesting, they voted the exact same way since the year 2000, and we have that for you here. Follow me here for a moment. Former President Trump carried Macomb and Monroe in both 2016 and also in 2020. But before that, they were blue, with Barack Obama getting the W. George W. Bush took the counties back in 2004, but that was the only time, losing to Al Gore in Macomb and Monroe in the 2000 race. Now, comparing the presidential to the gubernatorial races, and I just geek out on this stuff because I find it so interesting. I hope you do too. During that time frame, Monroe County has been overwhelmingly red, but Macomb is more purple. And that's where things get really interesting. Check this out. Going back to the 2002 gubernatorial race, Macomb County has voted the opposite of what it did in the presidential race. Opposite. Stay with me here. Governor Whitmer won the county both times after Trump won it. And that pattern actually holds throughout this entire time period, going all the way back to when Dick Posthumus won Macomb County 2 years after Gore won it in the presidential race. And so it's just fascinating to see the split there. But the governor's race is 2 years from now. So let's focus back on the presidential race for a second. I know you need to catch your breath after this presidential race before you deal with another consequential election. We asked you Monday who you thought would win Michigan if the election were held that day, Vice President Harris or former President Trump. And we heard a lot from you that day, more than we were able to actually share. So here now, a bonus pulse check.
I think it's just too close to call.
Donald Trump.
Why?
Because when he was in the election last time, he was doing everything that was right and positive.
I think it's going to be real close. Real close. It's going to be a real close race. I don't know.
I would say it's really close to call. A little too close to call right now.
And why do you think that?
Because there's so many people and everyone has their way that they see the different candidates, right? So, for example, when it comes to Trump, there's so many things that he already done. He's already been a president. So they're able to see a lot more of what he's done in the past and use that to help them with this voting, as well as, well, this is the first woman to be president, possibly. And being able to get that and so many different thoughts on what can happen, what has happened, what shouldn't happen. That's why I would say it's close to call.
Now, you saw earlier we caught up with Senator Peters this afternoon. We also wanted to talk to him about the state of the presidential race. He agreed that it's tight, it's close, but also says that's par for the course with a swing state like Michigan.
There's no question this race is very tight, and it's exactly what we expected. You know, Michigan is a national battleground state, and by definition, if you're a battleground state, it's going to be a very close race. It's going to go right down to the wire. I'm not surprised by where the numbers are right now. That is something we would expect. But it also means we all have to be very focused on making sure that we're getting every voter to the poll. And it's important for candidates to come in and make their case as often as they can. You know, I've gotten to know Kamala Harris very well over the years. She was my seatmate in the Senate. I know she cares deeply about Michigan. She understands issues in our state, and I'm really pleased the fact that she's making so many visits to see us.
And we'll see if both these candidates talk to the Pulse. We put out the call again today. Thanks for joining us here on the Pulse. Stay tuned for Battleground with SC Cup. I'm Rup Raj. Have a great night.